Thank you very much for having me. I'm very happy to be here with you today. I am Dr. Patrice Caire, and I do research in artificial intelligence and robotics. I have a PhD in computer science and have worked extensively in Silicon Valley and in academia. As you know everywhere very well today, only 23% of women are working in the tech industry today. No wonder then that the point of view of women is not included in the design and development of the artificial intelligence tools and systems that we use every day. Instead, this system often reinforces these inequalities and stereotypes of our society. It is exactly for these reasons that I've decided to focus my work on this question. How can artificial intelligence systems support diversity, equality, and inclusion? Let me start with a story. I have a friend, Jane, who was looking for a job. So I see an ad, I send it to her, and she contacts me right back and says, "Patrice, I cannot see the ad." And I say, "But Jane, I'm looking at it right now. I have it under my eyes." What was happening? Well, what was happening was that Amazon, who was trying to hire people between the age of 18 and 54, tried to, which is illegal, of course, arranged something with, at the time, Facebook, now Meta, to bypass the law. So how did they do that? Well, they displayed the ad only to people, to users whose profiles were indicating that they were between the age of 18 and 54. This is illegal. This is a way to bypass the law, and this is not fair. My friend Jane was 60 at the time, so she could not see the ad. She could not see it because it was not shown to her. And I was below 54 and I could see the ad. So we can see that it is in the interactions between AI systems and humans that often the ethical issues are taking place. But we use today many different kinds of systems. For example, when we log on to our phone, we use image recognition. When we also dictate, we use NLP, natural language processing. And of course, today, there are more and more robots with embedded AI systems. But what are AI systems today? Well, they are systems which display intelligent behaviors, and they do that by analyzing their surrounding and taking actions to fulfill some goals. What is behind that? Well, today, the main approach is neural network, machine learning, and deep learning, and so forth. So for people who are not familiar with these topics, here is a very high-level example. Let's imagine that we have our system, and there is a new data, in this case, this black cat, and we want to know what it is. The system outputs, it's a black cat, it's a cat. So what was happening? How was that possible? Because in the training model, we had used a data set which was containing lots of cats, labeled cats, and lots of dogs, labeled dogs. So the bigger the data set and also the more diverse the data set, the more refined will be the training model and the more precise will be the output. So we see this is important, this data set is important. So let's consider now that we put as new data another animal, whatever, zebra. So we have a zebra, and what is our system going to do? Well, it is not going to recognize it, of course, because there was no zebra in the training data set. All right, well, we see again the importance of this. So let's look in real life how this can play out. In fact, I'm going to show you an image. There was this engineer who was looking at images, and suddenly he sees his girlfriend. But oh, shockingly, she was labeled as a gorilla. This was terrible, of course. This is not possible. And what was happening there? Well, the data had been wrongly labeled. And this happens sometimes very often because it is still done manually, this labeling, and by so-called Amazon mechanical Turks. And this is sometimes causes difficulties when in these cases, wrong labels are used on images. So this is like our zebra before. A zebra problem again. The data set was not of higher quality. So we can see that this was an issue. So, of course, Google tried to address this issue. And how did they do that? Well, a couple of years ago, they just removed the gorilla label. That was a bit of a quick fix, but probably it was cheaper than to address systematically the issue. But we have other examples. For example, image search is very important. And when you looked at image search a few years ago, you could return, it would return for the term CEO, it would return this output. Only white male. How is that possible? Our zebra problem again. Yes, the data set didn't include many women, probably any for the CEO term. So maybe the team who was working on this issue was not combining many diverse population or didn't have many women among them. But in any case, it was not addressed. And it was in all the different search engines. So what happened was that to check on the issue, which had made quite a scandal, the University of Washington earlier this year decided to do a project to see what was happening there. So they decided to check and what was the issue when you were searching for CEO. And very nicely, it displayed here on Google a more statistical representation of what today the CEO can be. Well, they decided, then the University of Washington decided to go further and to use a technique used by security and privacy researchers when they do test crashes for cars, for safety of the cars. In these cases, what do? They challenge the computer systems by a number of examples and to see how they hold up, the system hold ups. So the University of Washington decided to do a very, very slight change to start with. And so they just added a search term to this very slight change. An enormous difference happened in the output. And here is what we got. Our zebra problem again. There was no women again in this output, no people of color. It was outdated data which had been used to fix the issue of the first page, and nothing had been done to do a systematic approach to the whole problem. So this is an example these are a few examples there, but we can also see sometimes where there are the impact can be very dramatic on our lives. For example, when we use automated decision systems, it is used very pervasively today for many issues, for housing and for loan, for example. And there was this couple who was filing, husband and wife, they were filing together their tax return, and they were, actually the wife had the better tax history than her husband. But they had a new project and they wanted to check their credit line on the Apple Card. No, what happened when they saw that the husband had 20 times the credit limit than his wife? How was that possible? They contacted Apple and, requested to have some explanation. And as an explanation, Apple returned the answer that their automated decision algorithm was actually based on a 1974 law, which was, of course, bringing some totally outdated output when the data set was used in that way, because the situation of women in 1974, of course, especially the economic situation, was very different from today. So our zebra problem again, wrong data set and wrong outcome. But we saw now many different examples of biases and different way to deal with it. But how can we manage these biases? This was what the NIST, the US National Institute for Standard and Technology, addressed this year. They published a report in March, and in this report, they showed this picture. What is pretty interesting there is that what we are just starting to address and to look at is the tip of the iceberg, meaning that we are looking at, the problems which are biases, which are statistical and computational biases. So the rest of it is not addressed at all, and the rest is pretty important. So the tip of the iceberg that we're addressing today is addressed by many companies by providing toolkits. Which are often code Python code, using Python code, and providing a number of metrics for fairness, and also providing decision debiasing methods, and as well as visualization. But the rest of it, what is below the surface, the human biases, the systemic biases, is not taken into account, as they say, and it is still something to be done. But we still can do something. We can do something. In fact, what we can do is we can be on the lookout. Whenever we see some ethical issues with AI, we have to report them. We have to talk to each other. We have to try to find solution and not let it go. We have to be aware of this situation. And of course, we have to ask and demand that companies be responsible, and they are transparent. For example, they should be giving access to their data sets so that we know the composition, if they are diverse, if they are gender balanced. And of course, the responsibility is enormous for these companies, because in the automated decision-making algorithm that we see more and more in our lives, and which impacts us directly, companies should be really writing right up the sites that they are using these automated systems, and so that we as users have the opportunity to address and to contact and to say, well, there are some issues there. We have to fix something because the result was not right. And of course, we have seen that we are only 23% of women. So yes, we have to make sure that we have some teams which are diverse and balanced, gender balanced in the whole AI life cycle. They have to be from the design, from the pre-design, the design and development, and the deployment. They have to be diverse and representing society. We cannot just have a few percentage of the society being there doing all this work that we use all the time. And we have to make sure also that we have multi-factor and multi-stakeholders to test, to validate, to evaluate to do the testing scenario for all these systems. And finally, we have to make sure that companies are not operating in the legal void that they are operating in today. This is not possible because the companies are not there for philanthropic goals. They are there for business. And we have to make sure that our governments and our institutions are really there working for us to make sure that there are laws and standards, AI standards, to give a framework to all the companies producing AI systems. And we have to make sure that all these are enforced, and that we have set up also some legal ways to audit algorithms, all algorithms. So we see we can do a lot. And to conclude, I'm going to let you read this sentence. So what do we want to do? Do we want to let AI systems reinforce the stereotypes and inequalities in our society? Or do we want to make sure that we work together and we try to address these issues and work towards AI systems which are supporting diversity, equality, and inclusion? This is our choice. Thank you very much for your attention, and I'll be taking questions now. So there is a question actually here from Paula Castro. If there is no clear legal frameworks, how can we make sure AI is being regulated? Well, that is really a good question, because we have to follow the fact that the government are publishing some results all the time and some laws. So we have to follow the issue and see what are the bodies who are actually working on this. So that way we can make sure that we can also, when there is some petitions to ask, because, for example, there were many petitions a few years ago from scientists who were trying to regulate for AI, for example, the weapon industry, the autonomous weapon industry, which is a really critical area. So we have to make sure there that something is happening, and maybe join these discussions for the free frontier, or from the electronic frontiers and all the AI bodies which are working on this topic. So they are starting. The IEEE, for example, has been putting a report together, starting with the looking at different areas, such as the area of trust. So how can trust be a fundamental area to be able to build some more gender equality, and also more some specific standard for that. So there are some area. Every country actually has started to set up, to be in movement, to have something like this. So it is for us, and that was my first point. It is from us to also try to get informed and try to make sure that we follow the advances which are being done in this area. If there are other questions, please don't hesitate. I mean, gender equality is a huge question there. I mean, we cannot, being only 23% of women in the tech industry, of course, we are not represented. And it's not to say that the white males who are working on these products and on these softwares are not are biased, consciously biased. We have a lot of biases which are just unconscious. We have interiorized them, so we don't know. I mean, people often don't know that they are biased until they are being shown that this is at the expense of other people, other groups, other minorities, or other ethnic, or other people from the society. Often, when you are in a part of the control group, you don't see that actually others do not have the problem that you don't see, because you don't have them. So this is why the NIST was showing this importance of the human biases and this and the problem of the systemic biases. We all have biases. So the interesting part with AI's tools and systems is that they show us that we have biases because they are like reinforcing these biases, and we see them even more because it's so powerful. I mean, there are many instances of that in natural language processing, where if you translate one language into another, for example, it was done with the doctors and nurse in some languages. The doctor is neither feminine nor masculine, and in some languages where it has a gender, it was translated by a male automatically, even though sometimes it was a female. So female are considered nurses, and doctors and males are considered doctors, excuse me. So it is all these biases which are not good because they reinforce also what is happening in our society. For example, another example, for the past 10 years, we have been having this dictation on the phone, like Siri, like what we see on Amazon. I mean, everybody now has a digital assistant. Well, from the start, the digital assistant were feminine voice, female voice. And they have been, even now, for some digital assistant, it's still a female voice. Do you know why that is? Well, simply because the research, social science research, has shown that female voices appear to be more passive and more amiable. And so people preferred having a digital assistant which would be passive rather than some thing they would perceive as more controlling or more dictatorial or more, male-oriented if it was a voice. In fact, it's only this year that Apple added to its Siri voice a gender-neutral voice. So we are making progress because people have been complaining for ages to see that these voice assistants would be more gender biased, less gender biased, and this has finally occurred. But it takes a long time, and it takes people to be on the lookout. That's what we have to be, on the lookout whenever we see something which doesn't feel right, where you feel that you are being not favored, but on the contrary, we are being discriminated. Then you should just speak out and demand that things change, because it's only like this that they will change.